So we're last week we started Daniel, first 7 verses, and now we're going to take on verses 8 to 17. And last week I kind of I did kind of the little teaser thing and said something alluding to the fact that Daniel was put in this situation where he was going to get, he and his friends were going to get this place to stay in the palace, the food to eat, you wouldn't be out in the sun blazing, working in the salt mines, you wouldn't be doing whatever, but because of your God-given abilities and intellect and ability to learn, you were chosen to be in this group. And so bearing in mind, just to kind of to remind ourselves, Nebuchadnezzar who was at this point was the king of Babylon, had gone and attacked Jerusalem, and with the idea that it's not like, he was smart when he went into a place. He didn't go in with the idea of I'm going to make everybody into Babylonians. He just said, what I want from you is your money. If you're growing crops, I want a percentage of those crops. And I'm interested in having a governor that has my best interests at heart, that will govern you. In other words, you're no longer going to be a sovereign nation. And so he brings, they look over the people and they take out, and this makes sense. This guy was brilliant. You take out all of the military guys, the young guys that were trained for battle, and you get them out of there because you don't want them instigating a rebellion. And you get the royalty, so you get all the princes and all of that, and you bring them back to Babylon so that you can deprogram them and make them fit into your little box that you've designed. So that's how Daniel and his 3 buddies got taken to Babylon, was under that program. Now they were going to face a 3-year program of training, kind of like a 3-year college curriculum where they're going to learn all the history of the not of the Babylonians, because I don't think they had that long of a history, but the Sumerians. And he kind of, I think, thought, well, I'm here, God has me here, I continue to place God number 1 in my life. And he'd pray, face Jerusalem, and he would pray 3 times a day. But he was unwilling to do certain things. So he's faced with a decision to make, and this is what we're going to talk about. And recently, when I'm talking about recently, I'm talking about what we've been learning through Andy Stanley and his lesson. We've been taught that when we are facing a hard decision, we should do what we know is right. And this, by the way, is excellent advice for every one of us, including myself. Do what we know is right before God, and leave the consequences up to Him. We can't control the consequences. We can control what we're going to do. We can't control how the other people are going to react. that's God's job through His Holy Spirit. I think it's a great test. It's a great test of our faith, is whether or not we're going to follow through and do what we know, as Andy would say, what we ought to do. So it seems that we're faced with tough situations rather, that demand our full attention. So it's not just something, well, you know, should I go down to 7-Eleven or down to Dollar General and pick up whatever it was. Not so much that, but you know, we're faced with all kinds of decisions to make. So let's look at a real life example of a godly man and his reaction to a demand from the king who is over him, which in this case is Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel is that man, and he's been ordered to eat from a menu of food that would defile him as a Jew, according to the teachings of God. God had already laid out, this is, you don't eat these unclean animals, and you don't eat this, and you don't eat that, because it's going to defile you.
And you don't eat food that's been sacrificed to another god, a false god.
There's one thing for certain, and that is, that we know about Daniel so far, is that he's going to obey God. Whatever it is, he's going to obey God. Now, how he goes about it is kind of interesting, but the fact that's where God comes in. We know what we should do. We're focused on, okay, I'm going to do this because I know this is the right thing in God's eyes for me to do. And you leave not only the consequences, but the way you get there. You leave that in God's hands. And that takes faith. And quite often, that's the toughest part for us. It seems that the Israelites considered the king's food to be contaminated, Nebuchadnezzar now we're talking about, because the first portion of the food that was made was offered to idols. And they had a particular chief god of the Babylonians called Marduk, M-A-R-D-U-K. And also, of course, ceremonially unclean animals, like we know the pig, we know other animals that crawl on the bottom of the shellfish were out. And according to the law of Moses, they knew very well what they shouldn't eat and what they should eat. He knows what he must do, that's Daniel. So he resolved himself not to defile himself with the king's food. So he's set in his mind and in his heart the desire to not defile. Okay, I don't care what the consequences are, because what does man normally do? Man goes, let me see, I have a decision to make, and we see this in politicians all the time.
Yeah.
Let me see, what are the consequences going to be if I do this, if I do that? Okay, well, that'll help me decide which one of these things I'm going to do. No, you do what's right. You do what's right for, you know the difference between a politician and a statesman?
Spelling.
Besides spelling? A statesman does what's necessary for the good of the country that he represents. A politician does what's necessary to get reelected. He doesn't care about the country. He wants to get reelected. So when it comes to
increase the salary.
well, and it's lots of things. So in this case, Daniel was concerned about pleasing God before pleasing man. even if the man is King Nebuchadnezzar. So he asks so he's already resolved himself. I'm not going to eat this food on this menu. But he had the wisdom. God gave him the wisdom to know how to react. He just didn't say, well, I'm just not going to eat this. I don't care if you kill me right here on the spot. I'm not going to eat this food. He's not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And but he doesn't do that. He kind of goes about this diplomatically. He asks this chief official for his permission not to defile himself this way. That's verse 8. So let's see how God will control the consequences. So he says to the chief steward for his permission to not eat the food. So, verse 9 says that God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. But wait, of course, there's more to this story. Now, the response of the official was one of fear. After all, he works for a ruthless king. And the king has made it clear how he wants this thing to go. And he's supposed to carry it out. For he was afraid of the king. In other words, is this decision that if I give Daniel and the boys in the band there, if I give them the permission to not eat the food, and they come out looking puny and undernourished and whatever, I'm going to lose my head over this.
He's a statesman or a politician.
That's right. That's exactly. He says, and what if Daniel and his friends didn't look as healthy as the other young men? This enters into his decision making. The official, of course, would lose his life. Verse 10. God was granting Daniel wisdom in his dealing with the official. He's dealing with a low-ranking official, but God has given him, God looks at his desire to obey the law, and he says, okay, I'm going to give Daniel the wisdom to do this thing right, since he's made up in his heart, in his mind. So Daniel approached the guard that was assigned to oversee the 4 young men. Verse 11. Now this is how we see that Daniel's having his faith put to the test. Speaking of a test, Daniel asked the guard to test the young men for 10 days. This is what he proposed. Not a bad piece of wisdom. Verses 11 and 12. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Luckily, this didn't take place in Texas. Daniel is risking everything, but he believes God will deliver them from harm. If you're obeying God and you're doing what you know God wants you to do, no matter what the world says, God's got your back. You don't have to worry. You really don't. Okay, after 10 days, after you've let us do this test, compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the king's food. So there are other young men that are not this little group that we're speaking of. In other words, it's a controlled test If we end up looking worse or better than these guys, then you're going to know right away. This is how strong Daniel's faith was. He did what he ought to do, and he didn't worry about the consequences. That was God's job. Daniel didn't say, oh, well, I wonder what's going to happen if he doesn't agree to allow us to do this test and whatever. He just says, we're not going to eat the food. We're not going to drink the wine. Let the chips fall where they may. Then when the test is complete, you can do with us as you see fit, verse 13. Let us go through this test and hey, if we come out looking anemic and whatever, then all right. But he knows God's not going to do that. And lo and behold, the guard agreed with the test idea. Verse 14. That's God's influence. He could have just said, wait a minute, don't we all know that it's much easier to say no than it is to say yes? Isn't that what we do? Well, I know my parents did that. Can mom or dad, can I do thus and so? No. They didn't give it 1 second of thought, just no. It's easier to say no. You say yes, and you may live to regret it. But if you say no, you're probably not going to regret it. So what was the outcome? That's, I guess, the question. At the end of 10 days, Daniel and his friends actually looked better than the other boys. Verse 15. And so they continued on this diet of eating vegetables and drinking water instead of the king's food. Verse 16. As for their studies, God gave the 4 of them knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. So it wasn't that God said, you don't need to learn about this Sumerian history. You don't need to learn about all of this. That's not. These are false gods and that they're worshiping. No, he gave them the ability because why? Because at the end of this 3-year term of education, they were going to stand before Nebuchadnezzar, and he's going to review how well they did. He's going to look at them and he's going to say, okay, look at the list and say, all right, he did really well with this, he did really well, he was really outstanding with this, and so on and so forth. So therefore, you can enter into my service. You passed the test. And after all, there is a grander plan than our plans. And God has a plan for Daniel and for his buddies. It's going to involve him being in the court, to have the ear of the king. But first he's got to pass these tests. He's got to learn so he gave them this knowledge and understanding. As for Daniel gave him an ability to understand visions and dreams of all kinds. Verse 17. Don't you know from the rest of this story how important it is for Daniel to be able to interpret dreams and visions? This is absolutely necessary that he be given this gift. There's great significance in the gifts that God gave Daniel, for God had plans for Daniel because of his great faith. So God is blessing him with all of this ability and this knowledge, not because he wants to puff Daniel up and have Daniel be walking around saying, hey, I be the man. Give me a vision. I'll tell you what it means. Tell me your dream. No. he has something that he wants Daniel to do. And he's got to prepare him. And it's because of Daniel's great faith that he was chosen by God to even receive those gifts. Because if you don't have the faith, then what good are you to God? Several times the king is going to turn to him for answers, and when no one else could be of any help, Daniel will be of great help. And he will have a chance to say to the king, as they would say, "O king, live forever." That was their big deal. That would be a smart thing to say, right? You're going into the king's presence. "O king, live forever." Here's the interpretation. Here's your dream, and here's the interpretation of it. We'll get to that. God wants servants that are faithful and true. And he's going to empower them for the works that he has in mind. Remember that saying for those. How does that go?
The name?
Provide. He provides those that he chooses. How's that? Gosh, there's an expression, I can't remember how that goes now.
He equips those he calls.
Yeah, it's along that line, but I can't remember exactly. Well, it'll come to me on the way home today. We can learn so much from the example that Daniel has set. The hard things in life are usually not the easy things. Amen to that, right? But what good is a servant that cuts and runs at the first sign of trouble?
That's Mark.
Yeah, that's right. Be a person of integrity, doing what is right even when there is a cost associated. See, this is the kind of stuff you miss out on when you're not a Bible study on Wednesday night. I mean, I learn more than everybody else because I got to prepare for it. So what I want you to do during the rest of the week, and as you get the opportunity, when you're faced with something that you have to make a decision on, and it doesn't have to be an earth-shaking thing, but if there's definitely a God's way of doing something and a not so God's way of doing something, then choose to do it God's way. Choose to obey Him first, and then let the consequences be on God, because He'll take care of you. Because He's looking for people of faith that are willing to make the right decisions. If you're just always taking the easy way out, even if it seems a little not so correct, you're not passing the test. You'll get other opportunities, but cause yourself to think about whom God guides, He provides. That's how that goes.
Yeah.
See, I sold myself short. I was not on my way home.
You
Or
beat
3
it.
o'clock in the morning.
If he's guiding you, He's going to provide for you.
Wake up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So let your let your integrity, what you do when no one else is watching, that's kind of, I like that definition of it.
Right.
Be a person who has high integrity. They don't care even if there's going to be a cost to it. Oh, but if I do this, then I'm going to have this happen, and then the government's going to write me a letter. No, just do what you do what you know is right, and then let God deal with that. And I have never been disappointed in how what the outcome has been. It's kind of like sometimes we just have to take our lumps too, right? We've done something and we go, shouldn't have done that, but okay.
And sometimes you have to wait to see what good is gonna come out of it.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt that it does take time. It doesn't happen overnight. Okay. All right, so we're